Hello, I'm Teresa Peters and I work in the baby room. This week our theme is Easter, so I thought it would be fun to read about a very famous rabbit. His name was Peter Rabbit. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dear," said Miss Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there, and he was put in a pie by Mr. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little buddies, they went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuce and some French green beans, and then he ate some radishes, and then, feeling rather sick, he went to find some parsley. Look how big his belly is. He is getting so full. But round the end of the cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting some young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster so that I think he might have gotten away altogether if he had not unfortunately ran into a gooseberry net, and he got caught up by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, and it was brand new. Peter gave himself up for lost, and he just cried big tears, but his sobs were overwhelmed by his friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve which he intended to pop under the top of Peter, but Peter wiggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and he rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in it if it had not been so full of water. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot, and he began to turn them over carefully, looking under each one. Presently, Peter sneezed. "Achoo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out the window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter, so he just went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very wet, sitting in that can. After a while, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He looked sad and scared. He found a door in the wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the woods. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth she could not answer. She could only shake her head. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish, and she sat very still. But now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it'd be best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scratch, scratch, scritch, scratch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. But presently, as if nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond was the gate. It's almost there. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could. Along a straight walk behind were some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the woods outside the gate. Mr. McGregor hung up his little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to scare the other blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him until he got home to his big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole, and he shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking, and she wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I'm sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made him some chamomile tea, and she gave a big dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime, she said. But Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end. Well, that's the tale of Peter Rabbit. I hope you enjoyed it, and I just want to say Happy Easter.